Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Rausam Pereira. Sri Lankan Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapakshe is on a 4-day state visit to India. He will hold talks on a number of key areas including trade, defence and maritime security cooperation, his office announced on Thursday. The visit beginning 7th February will be the Rajapakshe senior's first overseas visit since his brother Gotabaya was elected president in November. Rajapakshe will have a bilateral meeting with Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Saturday. The leaders are expected to prioritise defence and maritime security ties between both countries as the neighbours play a crucial role in the US-led Indo-Pacific initiative seen largely as an attempt to counter China. The visiting dignitary hopes to finalise the implementation of the $450 million line of credit pledged by Prime Minister Modi to President Gotabaya Rajapakse during his visit to New Delhi in November. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will take stock of ties between India and Sri Lanka. Joining me on the program today are Vishnu Prakash, former ambassador, Vice Admiral Shekhar Sinha, retired defence analyst, and K. Siddhartha, expert, Indian Ocean region. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Master, I'd like to begin the program with you. Before we talk about the visit and before we talk about what is it that both India and Sri Lanka would like to achieve from this visit, let's talk about the status of the bilateral relationship first. What's it like right now? Yes.
Sri Lanka is a part of India's Indian mythology. It's a relationship which goes back 2500 years. Not only that, it's at a very critical, very strategic geography at the peninsular tip of India. Now, what has it translated into? It has translated into very good or strong people-to-people relations, economic relations, defense relations, political relations. And I think it is one of the most critical relationships that we have with any country. There have been challenges in the relationship, which do happen when you have this kind of a proximity. But I would say that it speaks of the maturity of both countries and the desire of both countries and the people of the two countries to not only sort out the differences but steadily build the relationship. And while we welcome the very important guest who will be coming today, I may also add that even after remitting office in 2018 and 2019, he has been coming to India. He is he's a popular leader in Sri Lanka. At the same time, he's a leader who has striven to leverage relationships with other countries to the best advantage of Sri Lanka. So it's a visit which is important, and it has already been said by him and by our side that we hope that this visit will further build on the age-old civilizational relationship between our countries.
All right. Admiral, let me bring you into the picture then. Let's take this point that the ambassador was making forward as far as Sri Lanka's strategic location is concerned. You know, from our point of view and keeping in mind what we would like to achieve in the Indian Ocean and beyond, how important is Sri Lanka in our scheme of things?
The ambassador made a very pertinent point that when you are close neighbours, you do have some ups and downs. Bound to happen. It's like, you know, being in one big family. But both countries have told each other that we understand that the strategic interests of any country actually reflect the interest of that country first and anybody else later. And therefore, if Sri Lanka is inclined to economic activities by the Chinese in their country, India must not feel that their security concerns are being jeopardized. And it has been said by our Prime Minister, it has been said by our External Affairs Minister a number of times, and recently in the ASEAN Foreign Ministers Conference, that we develop our relationship based on India's strategic interests. So there is nothing hiding. Both countries have been very frank to each other, and they have been very open. The armed forces enjoy a very close relationship. Most of their training is done here. It doesn't mean that they enjoy a lesser relationship with China and Pakistan. But we always believe that our relationship is not either or. Our relationship is totally based on our bilateral relations. And even now, I just happened to attend a conference in Colombo. It was organized by one Chinese think tank, the National Institute of South China Sea, and the Pathfinder Foundation. I was invited to give a perspective that we think. And there, the minister, the Sri Lankan minister who joined us for a little while, he made a mention. He made a mention that China is our friend, but India is our brother. And we are not going to do anything which will jeopardize the security. And this has been said number of times by the presidents and the prime minister. So what I'm driving at, that our relationship as far as defense is concerned, or as far as diplomacy is concerned, well, diplomats have to work very hard, because when the relationship tends to get little off track, to get it back on track. Importantly, that this visit of the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka is the first visit abroad. Defense and maritime security is one big aspect. As you know, that Sri Lanka is part of our maritime domain awareness network. We have got radars there, and we got all the grey shipping data. We exchange notes. And more importantly, we have had a visit of our own national security advisor just in the last week. And the Prime Minister visit is by and large back to back. So I would believe that the maritime security is going to intensify even further. We already have EEZ cooperation. So I think that we should look forward to strengthening those maritime security and defense relations, and diplomatic relations are in any case they are an ongoing process, and they have seldom been off track.
Okay. Talking about the maritime domain, Siddhartha, I'd like to bring you to the picture now. There are several reports that talk about how Sri Lanka, Maldives and India would like to come together really to try and further their own interests in the region. Do you see that happening? How far do you see that going? How is it going to benefit each of these countries?
Indian Ocean Rim country is a very interesting region from a perspective of both Sri Lanka, Maldives and combine it with India. And the relationship goes on to go much beyond that. First of them, they go on to be lying on by and large a similar type of a continental shelf that will go on to mean that that is the fishing resources in the continental shelf domain goes on to be the prerogative of all three of these countries concerned. Second is that as far as the maritime security of this region is concerned, you go on to pick up Malacca Strait, and then on the other side you go on to pick up Socotra, Red Sea region. I mean, this is going to be one of these biggest sea lines of communication that you're going to be having it. And Sri Lanka, Maldives and India, all three are going to be having a stake in that if there is something that is going to go wrong with it. The third part is associated with the satellite coverage of this region. That is, any satellite that goes on to be on the equatorial plane over the Indian Ocean, that is able to monitor and it is able to have a surveillance over the entire of this region, and that goes on to be in the best interest of all three of these countries concerned, and one satellite can go on to serve all of this purpose. That's the basic reason that ASEAN countries also some time back referred to India to have a security outlook over this region, and they can go on to guide most of the ships. The fourth part is associated with some of these external threats that you're going to be having in terms of the expansion of the blue water navy regime of China, and any such type of a threat in that region that is not going to be faced by India alone. It will going to be faced by Maldives, Sri Lanka, and India too will going to become a part of it. The fourth is associated with again the strategic interest that is going to be between Gwadar and that of again Malacca Strait. Most of these sea lines of communication going to pass through Maldives. They are going to come to Colombo, and then thereafter they are going to move all the way to Malacca Strait, touching Andaman Nicobar. Now you cannot go to separate all of these aspects. Over and above, now when we go on to be talking about a new type of a narrative, a new type of a strategic narrative that is ruling the whole of the world, that is not being called the Asia Pacific region, not being called as Asia Pacific and Indo-Pacific region. Now in that context, Sri Lanka, India and Maldives, all of them are going to be a part of it. And to add to it, third of it, that is the geoecological considerations. When you go on to be talking about Indian Ocean as a whole, there is no way you can go on to separate Maldives out, you can separate Sri Lanka out in India out of it, because any type of a dominant pollutant that goes on to be hanging in the Indian Ocean waters is going to affect all of them adversely. And the last part is that is any type of research that you're going to be having it with respect to the climatic aspect, whether there is a talk of seawater level rising, or the monsoons being disrupted, or the temperature of the Arabian Sea or the Indian Ocean going to be increasing, that is going to be monitored only by few satellites, and it is these satellites that are going to share this information and this knowledge through the whole of the world. Now this is the common sharing pool, common knowledge pool for all the three countries concerned. So how is it that we can go to separate India, Sri Lanka and Maldives from a common interest in the future, a sustainable interest in the future, and a geostrategic consideration that goes to affect all of them in more than one way, and counting the Somalian region and the Horn of Africa, where a lot of disruptive activity is going to be taking place. This region is going to be the region. It is actually the focal point of the Indian Ocean rim countries in this space.
Okay, all right. Taking the discussion forward now, let's focus our next segment on the visit itself. Ambassador, what is it that we would like to get, or we would like to take away from this visit? And what is it that Sri Lanka would like to take away from this 4-day visit?
First of all, I am very happy that we have been, or let's say why we, this government, the present government, has been much more proactive when it comes to relationship or on various aspects, internal, domestic and external. But within days of this government, the Sri Lankan government getting elected, India's External Affairs Minister went in November, and it is again quite a remarkable thing that the very first visit of Gotabaya Rajapaksa happened to India. Similarly, as has been mentioned by my co-panelists, Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa has also made India the first port of call. That said, and Admiral Sinha, Admiral Sinha made a very valid point about that Sri Lanka, like any other country, will look at its interest first. It's very natural. Which means what? Which means that they will certainly want to have good relations with China, will want to have good relations with India. Whether China is a brother, is a friend, or India is a brother, that I think is basically semantics. But one factor that we have to now acknowledge is that the shadow of China, muscular China, financially strong China, is growing very rapidly. And China has arrived in the South Asian region and is building relationships. So I'm mentioning that because we and China and India in some ways are doing similar things, in that we are assisting in the development of Sri Lanka. We are both countries are setting up infrastructure projects, wanting to build bridges. So first thing that India is doing and needs to be to guard against is that we do not and will not and should not get into any competition with China. We have our strengths. We have a kind of a people-to-people relations and cultural relations and broad relationship which no other country can match. So that is one aspect. When we look at what Sri Lanka expects from us is, what Sri Lanka expects is that India, being the biggest country in the region, opens up its doors in terms of having close economic ties, cultural ties, defense and security ties, and which we are doing. I mean, I would like to note here that over the years, despite the fact that Sri Lanka's per capita income is twice that of India's, that's an important factor. Yet, India being the large country, India being a technologically most advanced country, a strong, so we have extended more than $3 billion worth of assistance over the years to Sri Lanka, and that will continue. Our Sri Lanka's expectation is, and our determination is, that we should now be faster in implementation.
Right.
And for example, what we have been doing is to set up high impact community development projects, which are doing quite well, and we have to continue, because we also have a sizable section of the people of Indian origin, the Tamilians, which are about 10% of the Sri Lankan population. So that is the other aspect, that we are interested in the welfare of people of Indian origin, but very much we stand by the unity and integrity of Sri Lanka. So there are this whole lot of issues and opportunities and challenges. We have a free trade agreement with Sri Lanka, and the Sri Lankan exports are increasing to India, although the overall balance is in India's favor. India is one of the largest investor. Indians are one of the largest segment of tourists go from India to Sri Lanka. So in short, it's a very broad relationship. It's an important relationship with both the countries. It's a sensitive relationship.
Right. Because
Sri Lanka, being a geographically smaller country, that is natural for them to have both, they want to have close relations, and yet they have suspicions, real or imaginary. So in this kind of a situation, regular exchanges, regular high level exchanges, dialogue, and to continue what we are doing is the right way forward. And I think that both countries have demonstrated that they are very interested in continuously strengthening this relationship, and that's what I think is happening.
Okay, all right. Admiral, the ambassador brought up the issue of China. Do you believe China is going to be the elephant in the room when the leaders of both countries meet?
Well, China will watch this visit very carefully and very closely. Chinese are known to do that worldwide. They don't make any statements, but you wait for the right time to come back as a countermeasure, whatever is required. But three things I would like to mention here. First is the Modi government's, the neighborhood first policy, followed by Act East, in which BIMSTEC has become a very, very important agenda of the government. And third is, out of BIMSTEC is the connectivity. Now, my sense is that, like we have had the relaxation of the cabotage law for Bangladesh, meaning that the Bangladesh coastal navigating ships can come to Indian coastal waters flying the Bangladesh flag. Earlier, most of the countries have this cabotage law in which you cannot do that. You have to fly the Indian flagship and only those can come inside. But we made this relaxation to Bangladesh, and the results are here to see. It has increased the coastal navigation, small trades have increased. The similar dialogue has been going on with Sri Lanka for some time. I would hope that that connectivity gets resolved and signed this time, because we don't have many countries with whom we can do the relaxation. People always talk about Chola Empire and this empire. People used to the trade was right up to Indonesia and even to China, but none of them were open sea trade. They were all coastal trade. How did it happen that the tradesmen would go with the smaller ships and follow the coastline of all these countries, including Thailand, Malaysia, Myanmar, right up to Indonesia? Because we didn't have ships strong enough to take the fury of the sea, if you like. So I think we must go back to that if we really want to increase our trade, the smaller trades. As far as Bangladesh is concerned, we also have an agreement in which we can utilize the inward sort of riverine trade routes, because Bangladesh runs on that. Similar thing can't happen in Sri Lanka, because Sri Lanka is a different geography. But in the maritime connectivity, in the lines of BIMSTEC, in the lines of neighborhood first, in the lines of Sagar, which Prime Minister Modi, this acronym he has given to this country. So I think that they have all realized. My hope is that maybe the Indian government will consider that in this Sagarmala project, at least one of the ports of Sri Lanka could also be included, so that we could get an opportunity to develop their infrastructure, their port, let us say, you know, on the eastern side of the Sri Lanka. So I think these are some of the very important milestones which I sense that it might move in the positive direction.
Okay, couple of points that I want to take forward with you, K. Siddhartha. One is, of course, the relaxation as far as the flag-bearing ships are concerned. Of course, that immediately translates to what our fishermen and their fishermen would do, and that entire fishermen issue comes into the picture. Is there a solution to that? Is that going to be discussed? Second, of course, the issue that the ambassador raised, that of the Tamils. Do you believe that that is also going to be on the agenda as far as this visit is concerned?
Certainly, I mean, unless both of these issues are addressed in one or the other way, there is no way that we can go to think of a normalizing of this relationship between India and Sri Lanka. That is, we must go on to be, India must go on to be in the heart and minds of the Sri Lankan people in order to develop a better bilateral relationship tie. The issue with fishermen is that the Indian fishermen, they're going to be having a better technology, they are better equipped, and they are able to have those type of trawlers which goes on to help them mine fishes even that are going to be at the bottom of it, bottom trawling. Now, this is what exactly the Sri Lankan fishermen are not equipped for. Now, in that sense, they go on to go right up to the Sri Lankan boundary essentially for the purpose of fishing these regions. Now, that is number one, that goes on to become an issue, and in India, the fishermen don't go on to find enough number of fish species which they can go on to harvest for their own purpose. The moment you're going to stop them, that goes on to jeopardize their livelihood. The second is, in trying to do it so, they always go on to transcend into the maritime domain of the Sri Lankans, and they do go on to get caught in that place, and then they are going to be detained in that place. Now, the third aspect associated with when you go on to deplete the entire of the Indian Ocean of these type of fishes, particularly near the Sri Lankan continental shelf, then that is going to be a grave ecological concern, because that will always go on to cause for a greater amount of an over exploitation of the fisheries by the Indian fishermen, not to talk about the effect that it can go on to have on the fishermen of the Sri Lankan region as well. Now, the issue in this case is, the real issue in this case is how exactly that we can go on to ensure that the fishermen don't go on to cross each other. This can be done in many ways. One of these ways is that we must go on to institutionalize such type of a fisheries activity by having a joint domain of sorts. I mean, there must be a certain type of a protocol that we have to follow, India and Sri Lanka has to follow. So that will go on to entail developing Sri Lankan fishery as well and developing Indian fishery also at the same time. Now, developing Indian fishery will go on to mean that you have to develop some downstream units so that the value addition with Indian fishery goes on to become very, very high. In Sri Lanka, you have to talk about inland fisheries and developing their ponds so that they don't have to entirely depend on the maritime fishery. The second is associated with its security part. If it is that India doesn't going to help the Sri Lankans to develop that, China will go on to give its trawlers, China will go on to give a high quality trawler and mechanized boats to that. And when they go on to be coming, they will be loaded with certain type of chips that will go on to have a long-term effect of having a surveillance on the Indian coast as well. Now, India has to distance itself away from that part as well. The third part is while trying to do it so, India must go on to exercise a good amount of institutional development on the Sri Lankan side, that these two countries merge their fishery resources in such a manner that they don't go on to spoil the ecosystem also of this region. Sure. So this is how exactly both of these countries can go on to join their hands together.
Right.
Now, coming to the second question of yours, if you can go on to please repeat it.
Yeah, on the Tamil, on the Tamil issue, yes.
Now, India had been able to sacrifice, as I go on to see it, I go on to use the word sacrifice, the Tamil issue. I mean, largely because if you go on to take one issue, they abstained from Geneva. And when they abstained from Geneva, and that was essentially for targeting the Sri Lankans, that the Sri Lankans would be, they have to follow certain type of protocols, and they have been torturing the Tamilians in that region. India choose to abstain for it, and I going to see it largely because largely from an angle of maintaining this relationship was far more significant in the light of whatever has been the threat from China has been, and that is what is going to be a very, very good gesture that Indians have shown, and Sri Lankans have to reciprocate to it. Now, Sri Lankans have so far not reciprocated because as I go on to see it, Ambassador will be in a better position to let us know that. That is, the Sri Lankans have not reciprocated towards the Tamils because they still going to be prosecuting some people, they still going to be picking up IPKF, and they may going to hang them, they may go on to charge them with a variety of type of laws. Now, this is something that can be prevented, if that can be prevented, and we enter into such a type of a deal and agreement with the Sri Lankan government and with Rajapakse, so that the people-to-people contact goes on to become very, very good in this case.
Okay.
And if you're going to talk about sometime in the future, tourism development and glamorization of Sri Lankan people and Sri Lankan relationship with India will going to go a long way. You will go on to understand Jacqueline Fernandez has gone on to be a very goodwill ambassador. There will be a lot of girls and boys from India and Sri Lankan side who can go to shoot in Sri Lanka, and Sri Lanka can also go on to come. There will be a scope for a lot of joint ventures in tourism, in movie making, in joint stories, and not to talk about exploration of our entire of the ancient past in history as well.
Okay, all right. Time now to get closing comments from all my guests. I'm going to ask you to be brief because we've got limited time on the program. With how can we take this relationship up a notch? Starting first with the ambassador.
Well, first of all, we wholeheartedly welcome the visit of the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is a very important neighbor, and both sides have invested a lot of political capital and time and effort in building this relationship. Prime Minister Modi himself has been going to Sri Lanka regularly. He went in 2015, 17, 19. So one is that I'm happy that we are maintaining this tradition of having high level exchanges. Important thing is to stay invested. Important thing is that India is reaching out in an asymmetric fashion because we are the larger country. And we need to stay engaged, we need to be able to talk, have regular dialogue, and have a forward-looking outlook so that this relationship can become stronger and even more multifaceted. And that is what Neighborhood First is all about, and
Sure.
India is very much on that track.
Okay, all right. Admiral?
Two issues. One is that the intelligence sharing has really shown its effect. The present dispensation, they know that when the Easter Sunday attack took place, the intelligence input came from the Indian intelligence agencies. It's a different issue, but you know that they couldn't do very much. So they understand the importance of India, and India is a neighbor, closest neighbor, and if the chips are down, they are the ones who are going to come to help. The second issue is more to do with the a little bit of the priority of the religion's history. In Sri Lanka, very often it is asked that you have forgotten the King Ashoka's contribution to the the Indian nation, which was a much bigger nation, and that was the time when India was what India looks like today. And that is one aspect which is actually going to improve our all-round relationship. Though in the defense relationship these things don't make much of difference, but I would think into overall security situation analysis, it will be a very good gesture on our part.
Okay, all right. And Siddhartha, close the show for us with your quick concluding remarks.
Yes. That is, I'm going to see it from, first is going to be from an angle of the common interest both of these countries going to have. That is going to be scientific observations of the monsoons, that is one. The second part, of course, is studying of this continental shelf. The third part will be associated with a port of call. Sri Lanka and India, both of them have they go on to earn a lot and they're going to gain a lot by making Colombo port of call, Trichonmeli port of call, Cochin as a port of call, and they can go on to work jointly on that part. The fourth part is, of course, in terms of the common threat that they go on to be facing it from any country that is non-Indian Ocean country. And the fourth aspect is always going to be finding certain type of regions where the cooperation can go on to be much beyond than what exactly is only political. It can go on to be cultural, it can go on to be more than economic, and it can go on to be more and more of a people-to-people contact that will go on to spread so much amount of goodwill. And India's USP is soft power, it's not a hard power.
Okay, all right. On that note, then we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. See you again next time.